The sound came first, a thin, crystalline crack, sharp enough to slice through breath. Then the shatter. A wine glass slipped from Lila Navarro's trembling fingers, scattering across the terracotta tiles of the Lisbon townhouse she once believed would hold her entire future. Fragments glittered like fallen stars around her bare feet, beautiful and broken all at once. She didn't look down. She didn't move. She only watched the man she had once crossed oceans for, the man whose laughter had been her favorite sound, fold another crisp white shirt and place it into a lacquered suitcase. Marco Vega didn't even flinch at the crash behind her. He kept packing, back straight, movements efficient, as if he were merely preparing for another tasting tour, another television appearance, another glamorous escape that did not and had never needed her. The silk lining of his suitcase whispered each time he closed a zipper, a mocking exhale that filled the widening silence. "Marco," Lila finally managed, her voice thin as smoke. "You're really going?" He paused, but only long enough to adjust the cuff of his expensive shirt. "Let's not make this dramatic, Lila. We both knew things were fading." She almost laughed. Fading? He had been fading for months, disappearing into late-night shifts that stretched until dawn, tasting menus that never required her palate, business meetings with a sommelier young enough to still confuse ambition with worship. But she had stayed. She had always stayed. Lila's throat tightened. She tried again. "You cleaned out the company accounts." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, gone before she could hold him to it. "I moved what I needed. You weren't contributing anymore, Lila. You haven't made a film in years. The brand was resting on me." There it was, the blow she had always feared, delivered without hesitation. She pressed her palm against the kitchen counter to steady herself. The tiles felt cool, merciless, real. "You emptied everything," she whispered. "Our savings, the emergency fund, even the payroll account." Marco closed the last suitcase with a soft thud that felt louder than thunder. "I'll make sure you're comfortable," he said, as if tossing crumbs to a stray cat. "But I can't hold your hand forever." Lila swallowed a tremor. Her heart was beating too fast, too loud. She could almost hear the blood rushing through her ears, drowning out the distant hum of the Alfama district below, the trams, the street musicians, the life she used to adore. "Comfortable?" she repeated. "You're leaving me with nothing." He lifted the suitcase, testing its weight. "You'll manage. You always do." It was strange, how a man could spend years beside you and still not see you at all. Her dreams, once so vivid, seemed to blur in the air between them. The abandoned camera gathering dust in the studio, the documentary she'd never finished, the stories she had stopped telling because she was too busy telling his. Marco walked toward the door. Not once did he look at her fully. Not once did he hesitate. When the latch clicked behind him, a silence deeper than sorrow settled over the house. Lila stared at the empty doorway, at the ghost of a future she had already been grieving without knowing it. The shattered glass caught the Lisbon sun, scattering fractured rainbows across the walls. Mocking, mesmerizing, cruel. For a long time she stood perfectly still, as if any movement might cause her to collapse into the shards at her feet. Only when the first warm tear slid down her cheek did she exhale, soft and broken. And somewhere inside that exhale was the beginning of something she did not yet recognize. Not strength, not hope, but the faintest shift of the earth beneath a woman who had been standing still for far too long. If this moment has already pulled you in, if you feel the weight of Lila's heartbreak or recognize a piece of your own story in hers, stay with me. Your likes, your comments, your presence here help these stories reach others who might need them. And if you want to follow Lila's journey, her fall, her rise, and everything in between, make sure you follow the channel so you never miss the next chapter. A broken beginning is still a beginning. Let's turn the page together. 3 months earlier, Lisbon woke slowly under a curtain of soft, golden light. The city had that unhurried Sunday hush, even though it was only a Tuesday. Narrow streets still drowsy, laundry breathing on balconies, the river catching the first glint of morning sun. Inside the townhouse above the tiled rooftops, Lila Navarro opened her eyes to the steady rhythm of someone else's breathing. Marco lay beside her, one arm draped loosely over her waist, his face softened in sleep. Without the sharp lines of ambition and charm he wore in public, he almost looked like the boy she had first met in Sao Paulo years ago, laughing in a cramped cafe, sketching restaurant concepts on napkins while she storyboarded documentaries no one had funded yet. She watched him for a moment, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, letting herself believe, just a little, that this was still the miracle she had once thought it to be. 7 years of love do that to you. They teach you to tuck the shadows behind the light. Careful not to wake him, Lila eased from beneath his arm and slipped out of bed. The wooden floor was cool under her feet, the air tinged with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans that seemed permanently woven into the walls of their home. Inevitable when you shared a life with a chef who had built an empire on taste. Their bedroom opened onto a small balcony. She stepped outside, catching the distant chime of a tram and the scent of the river. For a moment, she closed her eyes and pretended she was still the girl with a camera slung over her shoulder, hungry for stories. Then responsibility tugged her back inside. In the kitchen, she turned on the espresso machine Marco insisted they couldn't live without, and watched as dark liquid flowed into delicate cups. She checked the calendar on her phone. Staff meeting at the flagship restaurant, wine distributor dinner, a charity gala where she would smile beside Marco as he gave interviews about their brand. Our story, she murmured to herself, amused at the language of marketing. Once, she had planned to tell other people's stories, to go where the world was rough and unpolished, capturing the quiet courage of ordinary lives. Instead, she now told his, over and over, polishing every angle until it sparkled. It had seemed romantic at the beginning. "You'll shoot our journey," Marco had said years ago, eyes bright with hope. "The rise of something real. Your films, my food. 2 visions, 1 life. 2 visions, 1 life." The phrase had thrilled her. Except, along the way, one vision had quietly folded itself into the other. She had taken over staffing, then social media, then private events. Her documentaries became promotional reels for his restaurants. Her interviews transformed into press kits. The camera she had once used to frame hurricanes and border crossings now filmed champagne toasts and Michelin inspectors. She told herself it was temporary, that once the expansion stabilized, once the 4th restaurant opened, once the investors calmed down, she'd go back. She'd pick up the stories she'd left waiting. There was always one more once. The espresso machine hissed softly. Lila poured coffee into 2 cups, added a touch of sugar to her own, and left Marco's black. She had memorized his preferences, as if they were coordinates back to herself. When he finally came downstairs, the sun had climbed higher, spilling warmth across the tiled floor. Marco was already dressed in a pressed shirt and dark trousers, hair carefully styled as if there might be cameras anywhere, at any time. "Morning," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek without quite looking at her. She smiled anyway. "Big day?" "Always," he replied, taking the cup she offered. "The investors from Geneva are in town, and the new sommelier wants to rework the wine pairing menu. Again." Lila leaned against the counter, watching him scroll through notifications on his phone. "I can handle the investors' dinner," she said. "You shouldn't have to worry about hosting and cooking." His mouth curved, half grateful, half distracted. "What would I do without you, You'd be fine, she thought, but said nothing. Because in the story they had written together, she had chosen her role. The woman behind the curtain, making sure the stage lights were always just right. After he left, kissing the air near her lips, murmuring something about a late night, Lila wandered into the small room at the back of the house that they still called the studio. Shelves of hard drives lined one wall, filled with raw footage from years ago. Fishermen at dawn, protests in the rain, a woman smoothing a child's hair while standing in line at a border crossing. Her camera sat on the desk, coated in a thin veil of dust. She ran a finger along its body, and the gesture felt like an apology. "Soon," she whispered, though there was no one to hear it. "I'll pick you up again, soon." Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification from a festival she once dreamt of. Call for entries. Last week to submit. Lila's thumb hovered over the email for a heartbeat, then she swiped it away. Later, she promised herself. She switched instead to the restaurant's group chat, answering staff questions, smoothing over a scheduling conflict, approving a design for a new menu insert. It was work she was good at, work that mattered to Marco, and that had become enough reason for a long time. Around midday, as she was composing an email to a food journalist, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hola," she answered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mrs. Vega?" A woman's voice, clear and professional, spoke in Portuguese with a faint northern lilt. "This is Teresa Rocha from Atlantic Bank. I'm calling to verify a recent transaction from your business account." Lila straightened. "Yes, this is Lila. Is there a problem?" There was a pause, the rustle of paper. "Yesterday afternoon, a transfer of €80,000 was made from the Vega Group operating account to a private account in Switzerland. We normally don't question large transfers for established clients, but given the frequency of recent movements, our system flagged it for confirmation." The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples through her chest. "Switzerland," she repeated slowly. "We don't have operations there." "It appears to be a personal account," Teresa continued, "under the name Marco Vega. The system shows a series of similar transfers over the past 2 months, from both business and joint accounts. I just need to confirm that you are aware of these transactions." For a moment, Lila could not answer. The room seemed to tilt, the shelves of footage blurring at the edges. "Yes," she said finally, though the word tasted like ash. "No, I wasn't aware. I'll need to check with my husband." "Of course," Teresa replied, her tone softening. "If you'd like, we can schedule a meeting to review everything together. It might be clearer on paper." Clearer on paper, as if numbers on a page could possibly soften what they were about to reveal. After the call ended, Lila stood in the doorway of the studio, looking at her sleeping camera, the quiet house, the view of Lisbon she had once called her dream. She had thought their life was unshakable. 2 people, 1 vision, a shared future etched against the blue line of the river. But illusions have a sound when they crack. Sometimes it's the shatter of glass. Sometimes it's the gentle click of a banker's pen against paper, marking the moment the truth begins to surface. The bank meeting should have been a formality. Unpleasant, yes, but simple. Lila told herself this as she walked into the marble-floored branch on Avenida da Liberdade, where the ceilings were so high they seemed designed to dwarf human problems. Yet when the banker, Teresa Rocha, greeted her with a look that was equal parts sympathy and professionalism, something cold stirred beneath Lila's ribs. They sat in a glass-walled office overlooking the city's elegant boulevard. Teresa unfolded a stack of papers with the gentle precision of someone delivering bad news to a grieving family. "This," she said softly, "is a printout of all transfers made from your joint and business accounts over the last 12 weeks. Lines of numbers glared up at Lila. 70,000, 52,000, 93,000, again and again. Dates she recognized, nights he'd said he'd been stuck at the restaurant, weekends he'd flown out for supplier research. Teresa waited, hands folded. "None of these were authorized by you." Lila's voice barely escaped her throat. "No, I'm required to tell you," Teresa continued carefully, "that although these withdrawals are legal under the structure of your shared accounts, the pattern may indicate premeditated financial relocation. It often precedes separation or relocation." Lila left the bank, clutching the folder to her chest, walking in slow, unsteady steps down the tree-lined boulevard. Lisbon glittered around her, terraces full of tourists, trams rolling past, perfume rising from bakeries. But everything felt distant, as if she'd slipped behind a pane of soundproof glass. By the time she reached the townhouse, dusk had painted the sky lavender. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't remove her coat. She went straight to Marco's locked home office and stared at the door as if it were a gate to some forbidden truth. For years, she had respected that lock. Tonight, she didn't even hesitate. She fetched the spare key, hidden, ironically, in a drawer beside their wedding album, and slipped inside. Marco's office smelled faintly of sandalwood and ink. Everything was meticulously arranged. Design sketches, wine lists, framed articles praising his culinary brilliance. A shrine to a man the world adored. Lila opened drawers with trembling hands. Receipts, contracts, invoices. Nothing unusual. It wasn't until she reached the bottom drawer, wedged slightly as if it resisted her, that she found it. A slim leather folder tucked behind old tax documents. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, some short, some pages long. They were not addressed to her. They were for Inez, the sommelier. And before her, Daniela, Maya, Renata, names Lila had never heard, women she had never met. Her hands shook as she read. Messages full of desire, of excitement, of plans. Plans that excluded her entirely. Plans for a fresh start, a clean break, a new life in Zurich. But it wasn't the infidelity that pierced her the deepest. It was the sentences that seemed written with knives. Lila won't fight anything. She never does. She's gotten comfortable living off my work. Once the new restaurant is signed, I'll move the rest of the money. She'll accept whatever I offer. A quiet, strangled sound escaped her. Something between a gasp and a plea for breath. Was this truly what he thought of her? That she was weak? That she had given up her dreams out of laziness rather than love? That the years she poured into building his empire were simply expected? Lila pressed her fingertips to her mouth as if holding her own heart in place. She sat on the edge of Marco's desk, surrounded by the evidence of a life she no longer recognized. And slowly, painfully, something within her shifted. A tremor of clarity, a thin, cold thread of awakening. For years, she had rewritten their story in the gentlest possible light, telling herself that love meant sacrifice, that patience would be rewarded, that building someone else's dream was noble, if done with devotion. But here, in this dim office, with her husband's contempt laid out in black and white, she understood something devastating. Marco had not rewritten only their marriage. He had rewritten her. Her ambitions had become inconvenient, her creativity irrelevant, her loyalty expectation rather than gift, her silence assumed. The illusion of their shared dream, the one she had tended like a fragile flame, disintegrated between her fingers. When she finally stood, her legs felt foreign, almost as if they belonged to a new woman who had not yet learned how to walk in her own story. She closed the folder, placed everything exactly where she had found it, and stepped out of the office. The hallway seemed longer than before, the darkness thicker. At the edge of the stairwell, Lila paused, one hand on the banister, drawing breath after unsteady breath. She didn't cry. Not yet. The pain was too vast for tears. She climbed the stairs to their bedroom, washed her face with water that tasted faintly of salt, and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back was not the one Marco had described in his emails. She was not passive. She was not powerless. She was not finished. And though she didn't know it yet, tonight was not the night she broke. It was the night she began to gather herself, quietly, deliberately, with the slow, unmistakable certainty of someone who has finally stopped believing a lie. Morning arrived without mercy. Pale sunlight seeped through the curtains as if hesitant to enter, as if even dawn understood that the woman sitting motionless at the kitchen table was made of something fragile now. Lila Navarro hadn't slept. The documents from the bank lay scattered before her like pieces of a broken map, pointing to a destination she never wanted. Betrayal, financial ruin, Abandonment dressed in luxury linens. The townhouse, once warm with the aroma of fresh herbs and simmering sauces, felt hollow. Every surface seemed too polished, too carefully curated, the kind of beauty that hid rot beneath its shine. She touched the edge of a bank statement with a fingertip that trembled despite her effort to steady it. Thousands, tens of thousands, draining away in a pattern as deliberate as a chef's plating. A key turned in the lock. Her sister Eva stepped inside, face tight with worry. "Lila," she breathed, crossing the room in seconds. "You should have called sooner." I didn't know what to say. Her voice sounded distant, as if echoing from the bottom of a well. Eva knelt beside her, scanning the documents. Her expression shifted. Confusion, then fury, then a protective fire Lila had only seen once before, when their father passed away. "He stole from you," Eva whispered. "He stole everything." Lila wanted to deny it, to soften the truth, but the facts lay silent and merciless between them. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why would he do this? If he wanted to leave, why gut our life first?" "Because some men," Eva said, voice trembling with anger, confused leaving with conquering. They drove to Clara Moreau's office together, Eva insisting she wouldn't let her go alone. Clara reviewed the bank transfers in Marcos's hidden accounts with a surgeon's precision. "Your husband has been planning this," Clara concluded. "Systematic withdrawals, international accounts, legal loopholes. This isn't emotional impulsiveness. This is strategy." Lila felt the words like cold water against her skin. "So what do I do?" Clara tapped a manicured finger against the paperwork. You fight with every document, every witness, every traceable euro." "But Lila," her voice softened, "a contested divorce of this magnitude requires resources. Financial resources." Lila swallowed. "How much?" Clara hesitated, a sign in itself. 75,000 euros to begin. Possibly more. Lila exhaled slowly, as if trying to hold her own breath intact. "I don't have anything. Not even enough for rent next month." Eva reached for her hand, but Lila barely felt it. She floated in a numbness so deep it muffled even grief. Clara's words followed her out of the office and into the Lisbon wind. "You have to decide quickly. He is already acting as if you won't resist." By the time Lila returned home, exhaustion had settled into her bones like winter frost. She walked through each room, touching furniture she had chosen, artwork she had hung, plants she had nurtured. Everything was familiar yet suddenly foreign, like walking through a museum of a life that no longer belonged to her. In the bedroom, she found an envelope lying on the bedspread. Her name written in Marco's slanted, effortless handwriting. Inside was a document titled Transitional Housing Agreement. Polite words masking cruelty. 30 days to vacate the townhouse. No mention of support. No mention of partnership. Just efficient, emotionless detachment. Her knees nearly buckled. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, the letter slipping from her hands. 30 days. After 7 years of building, loving, sacrificing, believing, 30 days. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred, but no tears came. Not yet. Her phone rang, slicing through the silence. Unknown number. For a long moment she let it ring, but something, a faint tug in her chest, made her answer. "Hola?" A man's voice, smooth with an undercurrent of authority, replied. "Mrs. Navarro, my name is Elias Hart." The name struck her like a forgotten chord. Marco had mentioned him only once, years ago, in a tone thick with resentment. "He nearly ruined me," Marco had said. "He'll never get another chance." Lila straightened. "I'm sorry. Who?" "An old acquaintance of your husband," Elias said, after a purposeful pause. "I heard about your current situation." Her pulse kicked. "How could you possibly know?" "Lisbon is a small city," he replied, "and betrayal, unfortunately, travels quickly." She gripped the phone tighter. Why are you calling me? Because, Elias said, voice deepening, I believe we can help each other. Your husband took something from me as well, long before he took from you. A silence stretched between them, charged and unsettling. What do you want? Lila whispered. To meet, Elias said simply. There are things you deserve to know, and decisions you must make soon, before Marco moves to secure what remains. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She didn't trust this stranger. She didn't trust anyone, but she had nothing left to lose. Where? She asked. The rooftop cafe at Miradoro de Santa Catarina. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The call ended before she could respond. Lila lowered the phone slowly, staring at the silent screen as if it held a prophecy. Outside, sunlight faded into the kind of Lisbon twilight that always felt like a promise. But tonight, it felt like a warning. She picked up the eviction letter again, tracing the sharp, printed words. 30 days. Her life had collapsed in a single week. Her heart was bruised, her finances gutted, her home destined to vanish beneath her feet. And now, the one man her husband feared most had reached out to her. Whether Elias' heart was salvation or danger, she could not yet tell. But as the first true tear finally slid down her cheek, Lila understood one thing with absolute clarity. The next chapter of her life would not be written by Marco Vega. Not anymore. The next afternoon, Lisbon shimmered under a clear porcelain sky. From the Miradoro de Santa Catarina, the city spilled toward the river like a mosaic. Terracotta roofs, whitewashed walls, the slow silver ribbon of the Tagus catching the light. Street musicians tuned guitars on low walls. Tourists laughed over paper cups of ginginha, and somewhere below, a tram rattled along its track with stubborn cheer. Lila climbed the final steps to the rooftop cafe, each one feeling heavier than the last. She had chosen her clothes with unusual care. A simple navy dress, a linen blazer, hair pulled back. Not to impress, not even to conceal her exhaustion, but to remind herself she was still a woman with structure. Not just a collapse held together by habit. She spotted him immediately. Elias' heart sat at a table near the edge, where the stone balustrade framed an unobstructed view of the water. He wasn't what she expected. She had imagined a slick businessman, all sharp angles and arrogance. Instead, he looked still. Mid-40s, perhaps, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, jaw clean-shaven, suit impeccably cut, but understated. His posture was relaxed, yet there was an alertness in the way he scanned the horizon, as if always measuring distance in consequence. He rose when he saw her, setting aside the small espresso cup at his elbow. Mrs. Navarro, he said, inclining his head, thank you for coming. Lila, she corrected quietly. Please. Lila, he repeated, as if trying the name on his tongue. I'm Elias. They shook hands. His grip was firm, brief, respectful. No lingering squeeze to claim familiarity, no feigned warmth. It steadied her more than she had expected. They sat. A server appeared, all bright eyes and easy Portuguese. Lila ordered tea, needing something simple, something that did not involve choices that felt like betrayals. When the server disappeared again, an uneasy silence settled over the table. Elias broke it. I'm sorry, he said, surprising her, that our first meeting is under these circumstances. Lila gave a small, humorless smile. These circumstances seem to be the only ones people are willing to see me through lately. His gaze sharpened, studying her the way one might study a painting, not for flaws, but for truth. I know what your husband has done, he said, to you, financially and personally, and I know it's only the part you've discovered so far. A chill brushed her arms. How? Because men like Marco, Elias said calmly, rarely innovate their sins. They repeat them. She swallowed. You said he took something from you too. He leaned back, fingers light on the porcelain saucer. Years ago, Marco and I built a concept together. Not just restaurants, community hubs. Spaces that trained and employed at-risk youth, partnered with local farms, reinvested profits into the neighborhoods they served. We had a pilot store in Porto, another in Madrid. We were naive enough to think the world would applaud a business model that put people before profit. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a measured sadness. Who designed the concept? Lila asked. Elias's lips quirked slightly. I did. The structure, the funding model, the social programs. Marco brought charisma, relationships, media appeal. It was a good combination, until the investors noticed him more than the idea. Lila felt a slow recognition building beneath her ribs. What happened? On the eve of our third major investment round, Elias said, eyes drifting briefly to the river, Marco flew to London alone. He took our full deck, presented the concept as his personal vision, and secured funding that allowed him to buy out my shares using a clause I had overlooked. He glanced back at her, expression steady. In one weekend, I lost my company, my reputation, and several colleagues who believed his version of events, that I was too idealistic to be trusted with serious money. The words were so close to phrases she'd heard Marco use that her stomach turned. He said you nearly ruined him, Lila murmured. That's interesting, Elias replied. From where I'm sitting, he took everything that mattered to me and shaped it into the empire you now know as his. The Vega Group uses a watered-down imitation of my original model in every city he expands to. Silence stretched between them, thin and taut. Lila traced the rim of her cup, feeling the old, familiar instinct to defend Marco. To say there must be another side, a misunderstanding, an exaggeration. But the folder from the bank, the emails in his office, the eviction letter on her bed, they sat in her memory like witnesses. What do you want from me? She asked. Elias exhaled, a slow release of air that carried years. You are about to enter a war you cannot win alone. Marco's lawyers are aggressive. His investors are powerful. He is counting on you to be exhausted, fearful, and broke. He expects you to accept whatever crumbs he offers. That's not an answer, she said quietly. His eyes met hers, unwavering. I want to fund your fight. Her fingers froze. Fund? I will pay Clara's retainer, he said. Cover forensic accountants, expert witnesses, the full scope of a contested divorce. You will have every tool needed to reveal the truth of your financial partnership. You will not have to sign away your rights because you're afraid of starving. The offer was so vast, it took her a moment to breathe around it. Why? Lila whispered. For two reasons, Elias replied. One, because you are entitled to what you helped build. I have seen too many women erased from their own stories. I have no interest in watching it happen again when I can prevent it. And two, he didn't look away. Marco Vega is pursuing a new international deal with a European hospitality fund, a massive one. 5 countries, multi-million euro development, complete rebranding. It requires a spotless record, impeccable character, clean audits. A public scandal involving fraud, asset concealment, and marital abuse. Would ruin it, she finished. Yes, Elias said softly. If you pursue this fully, if you demand forensic accounting, public disclosure, official investigation, everything that is uncovered will be part of the public record. Court documents, press coverage, regulatory reports. I intend to use that record as leverage to ensure his deal collapses. Legally, transparently, without inventing anything. It landed between them like a stone in deep water. Lila looked at him, at the cool composure, the measured words. She saw not just a man wronged, but a man who had learned to turn pain into chess moves. So you are offering me justice, she said slowly, on the condition that it doubles as your revenge. He studied her face, and for the first time something unguarded flickered in his eyes. Fatigue, perhaps, or a grief that had learned not to show itself. You could put it that way, he admitted. Or you could say I'm offering you the means to stand up, knowing that the truth, once revealed, will serve more than one purpose. And if I say no, then you walk away with whatever Marco is generous enough to grant you. Elias said quietly. He secures his funding, grows more powerful, and continues the cycle with someone else. I do nothing. You try to rebuild from almost nothing. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the river and distant music. Lila felt suspended between two futures, neither of them clean, neither of them kind. Why should I trust you? She asked. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. You shouldn't, he said simply. Not yet. Trust is built, not requested. But you can verify me. Speak with Clara. She knows my history with Marco. Look up the filings of my former company. Check the dates, the investors, the clauses. You don't owe me your trust. You owe yourself the truth. Lila looked out over Lisbon, at the red roofs glowing in the afternoon light, at the river that had witnessed centuries of departures and returns. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't want to become like him. I don't want to exist just to destroy someone else. Elias's gaze softened. Neither do I, he said. I wanted to create spaces that healed people. I still do, but healing sometimes requires removing the infection, not pretending it isn't there. She thought of her camera, sleeping in the studio, of the stories she wanted to tell, not of vengeance but of survival, of reclamation. If I agree, she asked, I decide what we pursue, what becomes public. No illegal shortcuts, no lies. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Your case, your choices, my resources, my patience, shared aim, the truth. The truth. Such a small word for such a dangerous thing. She met his eyes. Then I'll think about it. Do, he said, sliding a small, heavy card across the table. The paper was thick, her name already printed beneath his number, as if he had known she would come, as if he had been waiting. Lila picked it up, feeling the embossed letters under her thumb. Her heart was pounding, but somewhere beneath the fear, another sensation stirred. Faint, unfamiliar, but insistent. Not hope, not yet, but the first fragile pulse of agency. As she stood to leave, Elias rose as well. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm not interested in saving you, Lila. You're not a damsel. I'm interested in seeing a man who steals from others finally face the full weight of what he's done. If in the process you reclaim what is yours. He inclined his head. Then perhaps something approaching justice will have been done. She walked away from the rooftop with the city spread out before her like an unwritten story. In her bag, the card felt heavier than its size could explain. To accept his offer was to step into a storm with her eyes open. To refuse was to drown slowly in waters Marco had already poisoned. Between vengeance and justice lay a narrow bridge. Lila knew that if she chose to cross it, she would have to learn to walk without losing herself again. That night, Lisbon glowed outside like a painting, lamps casting halos on cobblestones, voices rising in laughter from distant terraces, the river holding the moon's reflection with quiet devotion. Inside the townhouse, silence lay heavy as dust. Lila stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle. Every object carried the ghost of a decision. The sofa she'd argued for because it was too expensive. The framed reviews she'd insisted on hanging straight. The stack of cookbooks annotated in Marco's impatient scrawl. How do you grieve a life that is still physically present, she wondered, but no longer yours? On the coffee table, three things waited like choices. The eviction notice, the folder from the bank, and Elias Hart's card. She picked up the card first, the weight of it pressed into her fingers. The embossed letters both elegant and unapologetic. On the back, in a precise hand, he had written a single phrase. Truth has a cost. Silence does too. Her chest tightened. She set the card down and reached for the eviction notice. The language was polite, clinical. It thanked her for her cooperation in ensuring a smooth transition, as if she were a tenant and not the woman who had chosen every tile in the kitchen, every color on the walls. 30 days. After that, the home where she had poured 7 years of her life into someone else's dream would belong entirely to a man who had already moved on. Her throat burned. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city continued, indifferent and relentless. A tram clanged past, and for a moment she envied it. The certainty of its tracks, the knowledge of exactly where it was going. She had never felt so directionless. She had once believed in a God who cared about details, who arranged meetings and coincidences, who whispered guidance in quiet moments. She had prayed before exams, before film festivals, before her first date with Marco. She had lit candles in old churches and told herself the flicker of flame was proof that hope still existed. Now, standing in the middle of a life that had been dismantled, piece by piece, she felt nothing when she reached for that old faith. "Were you watching this?" she whispered into the empty room. "Did you see me give everything and stay quiet anyway?" Her voice cracked. "Was I stubborn or stupid? Was this your plan, or did you simply look away?" No answer came. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of an old building settling into itself. Lila sank to her knees on the rug, the eviction notice crumpled in her hand. For the first time since the bank, the emails, the rooftop cafe, she let herself unravel without restraint. Sobs rose from somewhere old and deep, shaking her shoulders, breaking through the composure she had stitched so carefully around herself. She cried for the girl who had come to Lisbon with a camera and a suitcase of unwritten stories. For the woman who had set that camera aside to be practical, to be supportive, to be enough. She cried for the nights she'd stayed awake waiting for a key in the door, convincing herself that dedication looked like this, that compromise was love, that erasing herself was noble. Somewhere between one shuddering breath and the next, the grief burned itself into a quieter ache. Her tears slowed. The rug beneath her was damp. Her chest felt hollow, scraped clean by sorrow. In that emptiness, a strange clarity slipped in, quiet but unmistakable. This, she realized, was rock bottom. Not a dramatic car crash, not a screaming match in the street, just a woman on the floor of a beautiful house that was no longer hers, holding a piece of paper that said, in legal language, "You are disposable." She stared at the ceiling. "If you're there," she whispered hoarsely, not sure whether she was addressing God, fate, or simply the part of herself she had silenced. "I don't need miracles. I don't even need explanations. I need the strength not to let this be the end of my story." The words surprised her. They felt truer than anything she had said in weeks. Slowly, she pushed herself upright. The room swayed, then steadied. Her face was swollen, eyes rimmed red, but there was a steadiness in her spine that hadn't been there before. On the table, Elias's card caught the light. She picked it up again. The fear was still there. Fear of becoming a pawn in someone else's revenge, of hardening into bitterness, of losing what remained of her softness in a war she had never wanted. But another fear had begun to rise beside it, the fear of doing nothing, of letting Marco's version of their history become the official record, of allowing the woman he described in his emails, weak, dependent, inconsequential, to be the only Lila the world ever saw. "I will not vanish quietly," she murmured. Her hands still trembled as she opened her laptop. She typed Heart Vega Dispute into the search bar, then refined it. Old company names, investment rounds, legal filings. The story appeared in fragments. Articles about a promising social enterprise that disappeared suddenly, a brief statement citing irreconcilable differences in leadership, a trade publication hinting at internal conflict and allegations of idea theft, a photo of a younger Elias and Marco, side by side, both smiling, the caption calling them visionaries. The more she read, the more familiar it felt. The pattern was painfully recognizable. One man stepping into the spotlight with someone else's light at his back. She called Clara first. "I met with Elias Hart," she said without preamble. "Is what he told me true?" Clara was silent for a long moment. "About Marco forcing him out?" "Yes. I was a junior associate at the firm that reviewed the documentation. I remember thinking the buyout clause was aggressive, legal, but morally questionable. The kind of thing a man with a good smile gets away with. So if I let him help, Lila said slowly, I'm not walking into a stranger's vendetta without reason. No, Clara replied. You'd be walking into a necessary fight with better armor. After she hung up, the room seemed to narrow around two paths. On one, fatigue, resignation, a small settlement, a quiet disappearance into a rented room somewhere along the hills. On the other, conflict, exposure, whispers in the city, long days in legal offices, and the possibility of reclaiming not only money, but truth. She looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. The woman staring back at her was tired, yes, wounded, absolutely, but there was a line in her jaw now, a light in her eyes that hadn't been there when this all began. I will not fight to destroy him, she told herself, voice steadying. I will fight to stop him from destroying anyone else the way he destroyed me and Elias, and who knows who else. She dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice. Elias Hart, came the familiar voice. It's Lila. She exhaled, feeling the decision settle into place as she spoke. I've thought about your offer, and? I'll accept, she said, on conditions. A pause. I'm listening. Clara remains my lawyer. I decide how far we push, what becomes public, what we let go. No illegal leaks, no lies. This is my life, not your battlefield. If we do this, it will be for justice, not spectacle. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. One more thing, she added. If I'm going to let you stand beside me in this, I need to hear the whole story, from beginning to end. Not the business summary, the personal truth, why you hate him, what it cost you. I won't walk into someone else's war blind. Another brief silence, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted, faintly roughened. Very well, Elias said. Come to my office tomorrow. I'll tell you everything. When the call ended, Lila set the phone down and let herself breathe. She was still afraid. She was still grieving. She still didn't know what her future would look like. But for the first time since the glass shattered on the kitchen tiles, she no longer felt like something broken waiting to be swept away. She felt like a woman at the edge of a battlefield she hadn't chosen, lifting her head, choosing her allies carefully, and stepping forward anyway. The morning the papers were filed, Lisbon was washed in a pale silver light, the kind that blurs edges and softens colors, a deceptive gentleness before a storm. Lila rose before dawn, her body buzzing with a fragile, nervous electricity. She dressed in quiet tones, soft gray trousers, a white blouse, hair pulled back into a low knot, armor made of simplicity, of control. Clara Moreau met her outside the courthouse, impeccably dressed, her leather briefcase clasped like a sword she had wielded 1,000 times. Ready? Clara asked. No one was ever ready for this. Not truly. But Lila nodded. With a soft click, Clara opened the file that contained every truth Lila had been forced to confront. Financial manipulation, asset concealment, emotional cruelty, a documented pattern of infidelity. Behind the legal language lay something far more devastating, an official acknowledgement that her marriage had not been a partnership, but a predation. The petition was filed at 9:14 a.m. By 10:02, someone at the courthouse had leaked it. And by noon, the headlines began to bloom across Lisbon like poisonous flowers. Celebrity chef Marco Vega faces fraud claims in explosive divorce. Documents allege financial abuse, hidden accounts, pattern of infidelity. Investors demand clarity as Vega's new project falters. Lila stood on the balcony of the townhouse, still technically hers for 28 more days, watching notification bubbles swarm her unlocked phone screen. Messages from unknown numbers, missed calls, emails from journalists. She turned the phone off. The world could wait, but Marco couldn't. At precisely 3:17 p.m., The building's entry buzzer howled like an alarm. Lila froze. Her first instinct was fear, not because she expected violence, but because she had spent years learning to absorb Marco's anger like a shield. Eva was beside her within moments. "Don't open that," she whispered. "Let him scream through the door." But Lila's breath steadied. Something inside her, a quiet resolve sharpened by the past weeks, lifted its head. "I need to do this," she said. She descended the stairs slowly, each step measured, each breath deliberate. The buzzer screamed again, followed by pounding. When she reached the door, she kept the security chain firmly fastened and opened it only a hand's width. Marco stood on the other side, flushed, sweaty, his usually immaculate hair disheveled. His eyes were wild in a way she had never seen. Not seductive, not charming, not even angry. Desperate. "Lila, open the door!" His voice was jagged, a cracked piece of porcelain. She swallowed. "Lower your voice. You ruined me," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "You did this," she said, steady despite the tremor in her ribs. "I simply stopped hiding it." He slammed his hand against the doorframe. "My investors pulled out this morning. The bank froze my accounts. There are articles calling me a thief, a manipulator. You think you can destroy my name because you're upset I left?" A wave of heat surged up her spine. Not anger, but clarity. Sharp, cold, clean. "This isn't about you leaving," Lila said. "You could have left without stealing from me, without humiliating me, without treating 7 years of my life like an inconvenience." "You weren't contributing," he snapped. "You've been living off my work for years." The words were familiar. She had read them in an email to another woman. But hearing them spoken aloud spat at her like a curse, splintered something inside her, yet not in the way Marco expected. The splintering formed space. Space for truth. Space for herself. "I built that company with you," Lila said evenly. "Every investor dinner, every press event, every sleepless night you spent creating menus while I rewrote proposals and ran operations. I was there. I worked beside you. I carried you. Then why don't you have anything to show for it?" The cruelty of the question was almost elegant in its precision. But Lila didn't flinch. "Because you made sure of that," she replied softly. His face twisted. "Is this about heart? Did he put you up to this? You're letting my old enemy drag you into his obsession." "He didn't drag me anywhere," she said. "You pushed me." For a moment, she thought he might break. Right there on the doorstep where neighbors could hear every word, where the facade he'd curated so carefully could crumble publicly. His voice softened to a plea she had once been weak to. "Lila, we can fix this. Let's talk. No lawyers, no press, just us." She remembered nights when that tone meant forgiveness, compromise, surrender. But now it felt like a rope he wanted her to hold while he pulled her back into darkness. "No," she said. The word floated between them, quiet but irrevocable. Marco blinked as if slapped. "What?" "No," she repeated. "We don't fix this. We don't talk. From now on, everything goes through Clara." His composure shattered. "You think you can walk away from me?" "I already did," she said gently. "The moment I chose myself." With a calm she barely recognized, Lila closed the door. Marco's fist struck the wood once, twice, a desperate thud, and then silence. She locked the deadbolt and leaned her forehead against the wood. Her breath trembled, her hands shook, but her spine stayed straight. For years she had been trained to absorb his storms. Now she had become the eye of her own. Upstairs, Eva exhaled a shaky laugh of disbelief. "You were incredible," she whispered. "Terrifying, like a woman reborn." Lila didn't feel incredible. She felt raw, trembling, exhausted. But beneath all that, something steady pulsed. A quiet, courageous heartbeat she hadn't heard in a long time. The lawsuit was public now. Her stance was clear. There was no going back. And for the first time in years, that truth did not terrify her. It felt like the beginning of her return to herself. The day Lila moved out, Lisbon dressed itself in that particular kind of blue that made even the tram wires look poetic. The city was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel, as if it were determined to be dazzling while she carried her life down 3 flights of stairs in cardboard boxes marked kitchen, books, miscellaneous regrets. The townhouse door closed behind her with a soft, final click. No scene, no audience, no farewell, just absence. Eva hugged her in the street, the way a sister hugs not just a person, but a history. "Call me if you can't sleep," she murmured, "or if you can, just call me." "I will," Lila said. Her voice was calmer than she felt. Inside, everything was a restless tide, surging and retreating against the fragile walls of her composure. Her new apartment sat in a hilly neighborhood where the streets were narrower, the buildings humbler, the laundry lines closer to eye level. The facade was cracked in places, ivy creeping up one wall as if nature had grown tired of waiting to be invited in. The landlord, a kindly woman with salt and pepper hair pulled into a loose bun, handed her the keys with a sympathetic smile. "It's small," she said, "but the light in the mornings is beautiful." Small was an understatement. 2 rooms, a bedroom no bigger than the mattress she laid on the floor, and a living space that had to be kitchen, dining room, and office all at once. The balcony was barely large enough for a chair and a pot of something green, but when she stepped onto it, the view stole her breath. The rooftops rose and fell like a tide of terracotta, and beyond them, the Tagus shimmered, a slow, patient witness to every reinvention the city had ever seen. Lila set down the box in her arms and gripped the metal railing, letting the wind comb fingers through her hair. The air smelled of detergent from someone's drying sheets and grilled sardines from a nearby tasca. It was nothing like the townhouse. It was hers. For the first few nights, she slept in fits and starts, waking disoriented in the dark, heart hammering as if she'd fallen. Memories arrived uninvited. Marco's key turning in the lock at 2 a.m., the muted glow of restaurant invoices on his laptop, his laughter in rooms full of strangers. On the 4th morning, when she opened her eyes, the light in the small bedroom was indeed beautiful, soft gold filtering through thin curtains, painting the walls in gentle fragments. She realized she had not dreamed of him. The absence felt like a mercy. Ava kept her busy with practicalities in those first weeks, transferring utilities, closing joint accounts, sorting legal papers into neat, labeled folders. But there were hours, long, echoing hours, when the noise of crisis faded and a different silence crept in. The silence of not knowing who you are when you are no longer someone's wife, someone's anchor, someone's backstage manager. Clara, ever blunt, suggested therapy. "You're building a new life in the middle of a war," her lawyer said. "You need someone who is not your sister, not your lawyer, not an investor with his own ghosts. Someone whose only interest is the shape of your heart." And so Lila found herself in a calm, airy office near Jardim da Estrela, sitting across from Dr. Sofia Almeida, who wore soft cardigans and listened with the focus of someone unafraid of silence. "Tell me," Sofia said on their first session, "what sentence you've been telling yourself most often lately?" Lila thought for a moment. "That I was foolish," she said quietly. "Foolish for believing him, for giving up my work, for not seeing what he was doing with the money." Sofia nodded. "And what sentence have you not allowed yourself to say?" She hesitated. The answer rose immediately, surprising her with its clarity. "That I was kind," Lila whispered. "That I loved with both hands. That I trusted because I wanted our life to be real, not because I was stupid." Tears pricked her eyes. Sofia offered a box of tissues without commentary, as if tears were as ordinary as breathing. "For now," she said, "I want you to commit to 1 hour a day that has nothing to do with him. No legal documents, no conversations about the case, no obsessing over headlines. 1 hour that belongs to you, alone." "To do what?" "That's for you to rediscover," Sofia replied, "but I suspect you already know." It wasn't until later, back in her tiny apartment, that Lila understood. The camera sat in its case on the bookshelf, one of the few pieces of furniture she'd allowed herself. She had unpacked it on the first day and placed it there almost ceremonially, facing the balcony, as if daring herself to acknowledge its presence. Her first free hour, she picked it up. The weight in her hands was both familiar and foreign, like holding an old friend you'd abruptly stop speaking to. She turned it on. The small screen flickered to life with a soft hum. No glamorous kitchen, no plated dishes, just the modest view of her own balcony and the city breathing beyond it. She stepped outside, lifted the camera, and pressed record. She filmed the laundry line across the street, bright shirts swaying like flags of ordinary survival. She filmed an old woman watering geraniums, lips moving in a song only she could hear. She filmed the tram as it rattled by, sparks of light glancing off its windows. The footage was simple, unremarkable perhaps to anyone else. To her, it was everything. In the second week, as the lawsuit gained momentum in the papers and Marco's image began to crack in public view, Lila's mind kept returning not to him, but to the women whose stories had been buried beneath his success. Not just her own. She remembered the quiet hostess who'd once confided she couldn't leave her boyfriend because all their accounts were in his name. The pastry chef who had signed a loan guarantee for love and ended up with debt she hadn't created. The investors' wives who smiled in couture dresses while their eyes told another story entirely. An idea unfurled, tentative at first, then with growing insistence. A documentary, not about Marco, about financial abuse, about economic cages built from trust and love and carefully structured ignorance, about women learning, too late, that love without autonomy was not safety, but risk. One afternoon, heart beating too fast, she drafted a proposal for a short documentary series and sent it to a local arts fund she had admired for years. She attached a sample reel made from the balcony footage and old clips from her pre-Marco days, faces of strangers who had let her into their lives when she was just a young filmmaker with hopeful eyes. For 2 weeks, she checked her email with the cautious eagerness of someone who both feared and craved an answer. Between legal meetings and therapy sessions, she let herself imagine it, shooting interviews, crafting narratives, turning her own pain into a lens through which others could be seen clearly. The rejection arrived on a Tuesday morning. The email was polite, even enthusiastic about her personal journey, but the message was clear: limited funding, highly competitive cycle, the committee uncertain that such a personal angle on financial abuse would attract sufficient audiences. She read it 3 times. The words blurred into each other, then sharpened painfully. Too personal, not broadly appealing. For a moment, she thought she might laugh. How many times had she heard variations of that sentence? Too emotional, too specific, too earnest. The familiar chorus of self-doubt rose like a tide. Of course, you left too long. Your skills are outdated. You're only interesting as a scandal, not as a storyteller. Who do you think you are, trying to start again? She shut the laptop gently, as if slamming it might break something she couldn't afford to lose. The apartment felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the balcony too narrow to hold the weight of her disappointment. She went to see Sophia that afternoon, the rejection email printed and folded in her pocket like evidence of a crime. "I thought this was supposed to be the part where I start succeeding," Lila said without preamble, sinking into the armchair. "Where the universe rewards me for being brave." Sophia smiled faintly. "Who told you healing came with a loyalty program?" Lila let out a shaky laugh that tasted like tears. "This hurts," she admitted. "More than it should. It's just one fund, one project. But it feels like confirmation that I was foolish to believe I could be who I was." "Who you were?" Sophia asked gently. "Or who you are becoming." The distinction settled between them, quiet and potent. "Starting again," Sophia continued, "doesn't mean the world rolls out a red carpet. Sometimes the first door you knock on closes in your face, not because you're unworthy, but because your story isn't meant to live there. The question is not, why didn't they want me? It's, will I let this be the final verdict on my return? Lila stared at her hands. They were ink-stained from jotting notes on scrap paper, a habit she had picked up again. She flexed her fingers slowly, as if testing their capacity. So this is what it looks like, she said softly, failing while you're still bleeding. And getting up anyway, Sophia answered. When Lila stepped out of the office onto the sunlit sidewalk, the city seemed unchanged. Cars, trees, people with grocery bags. Yet inside, something subtle had shifted. The rejection still hurt. It would hurt again when she opened her laptop, when she saw the email in her inbox, when she watched yet another news segment about Marco's case and felt the weight of what the world considered worthy. But beneath the ache, another knowledge had taken root. She had tried. She had moved, however clumsily, toward the life she wanted. She had lifted her camera in a world that had told her she was only someone when standing beside a man. And though the first answer had been no, the act of asking had already altered her course. Autumn seeped into Lisbon slowly, tinting the light with a softer gold, cooling the evenings so that people on terraces wrapped fingers around warm cups instead of sweating over ice. The lawsuit had moved from explosive headline to ongoing saga. The city, so quick to startle, had begun to adjust to the idea of Marco Vega not as untouchable genius, but as a man under investigation. Articles still appeared, but less feverishly. Anchors spoke his name with a careful neutrality that hinted at unease. For Lila, the noise outside had settled into a steady, relentless hum. Legal meetings, forensic reports, witness statements, the weeks blurred into an intricate choreography of proof and patience. In the eye of that storm stood Elias Hart. At first, their contact had been purely practical. He called with updates from the forensic team, forwarded summaries of financial findings, coordinated with Clara and her associates. His emails were precise, devoid of unnecessary flourishes. But as the days shortened and nights grew longer, their conversations began to stretch past the bounds of business. One evening, after a particularly grueling review of Marco's shell companies, Elias called later than usual. Lila answered from her balcony, knees drawn to her chest, a blanket around her shoulders. The sky was a deep indigo, the city reduced to constellations of light. "You sound tired," he said, skipping any preamble. "And you sound expensive," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "I've seen the invoices you approve." He laughed, a low, warm sound she'd heard only rarely. Occupational hazard. "How was Clara today?" "Efficient, terrifying, brilliant," Lila said. "I think the accountant we hired could track a missing euro through a hurricane." "Good," Elias murmured. Marco built his kingdom on the assumption that no one would follow the trail long enough. There was a pause, delicate and unplanned. "And you?" he asked. "How are you? Not the case." She hesitated. No one ever paused long enough to ask that without expecting a polished answer. "I got rejected," she said finally, "from a fund I applied to. A documentary idea about financial abuse in women. They said it was too personal." "I'm sorry," Elias said, and there was no politeness in it, only genuine regret. "That's short-sighted." "It's something," Lila replied. "But I filmed my neighbor's laundry flapping in the wind today, and it felt like breathing. So I suppose I'm still here." "Good," he said. "Stay here." The calls continued. Some nights were 10-minute check-ins, others spilled into an hour or more, threads of conversation weaving between court dates and childhood memories, between investment rounds and the first camera she ever held. Lila began to see the outlines of the man behind the calm exterior. He had grown up between cities, the child of a Portuguese mother and an English father, never quite belonging fully to either place. He'd built his first company at 28, lost it at 32, rebuilt a new one from ashes that weren't entirely his fault, but still felt like failure. He spoke of loyalty like a language he had once known fluently, but now used with caution. "So you stopped trusting people," Lila said one evening. "I stopped trusting charm," Elias corrected. People with charisma often use it as a smokescreen. When someone dazzles me now, I check my pockets. She smiled into the darkness. I used to see charm as proof that God wanted my life to be cinematic. And now? Now I think God is in the small scenes, she said quietly. The ones no one applauds. It might have continued like that, measured, growing, a fragile new connection built in the spaces left by older wounds. If not for the proposal that arrived one rain-slick Tuesday. Lila was at Clara's office when the private investigator, a wiry man named Duarte, laid a folder on the table with the reverence of someone presenting contraband. "These are email threads we accessed," he said carefully, eyes flicking between Clara and Elias, who had joined by video call. Private exchanges between Marco and his offshore advisor, as well as correspondence with a partner in Zurich. They clearly show intention to hide assets and misrepresent profit distribution to investors. Clara's brows knit. Accessed how? Duarte's jaw tightened. Let's just say his digital hygiene is poor, passwords reused, old accounts not properly secured. We followed breadcrumbs. Lila's stomach twisted. You hacked him. He didn't answer. It was answer enough. Elias, on the screen, was very still. What's in them? Duarte slid a few printed pages toward the camera. Explicit plans for moving funds out of reach. Discussions about using Lila's name to secure loans she didn't know about. Remarks about manipulating her perception. It's damning. Lila's hands began to shake. The words on the page blurred, then snapped into focus in shards. She'll sign anything if I tell her it's for expansion. Once the Swiss accounts are secured, I'll let her go. Each sentence was a knife confirming what her intuition had already whispered. But layered beneath the confirmation was something else. The awareness that this evidence had been obtained by crossing a line she wasn't willing to blur. Clara removed her glasses slowly. These emails cannot be used, she said, not in their current form. If opposing counsel suspects or proves they were obtained illegally, the judge will exclude them. It could even compromise the rest of our case. Duarte opened his mouth to protest. But they're true. They show his intent. We could leak them anonymously to the press. The public opinion alone. No, Clara cut in. Lila turned to the screen. Elias's face was partially shadowed, eyes narrowed in thought. She could almost see the equations in his mind. Possibility versus risk. Satisfaction versus consequence. Elias, she said slowly, tell him no. He didn't answer immediately. His silence stretched, filled with the weight of 8 years of quiet anger. These emails would destroy his standing with investors, Duarte pressed. They'd panic, pull out in days. The deal he's chasing would collapse before year-end. Lila watched Elias's jaw tighten. Here, finally, were the tools revenge had always whispered about. Sharp, efficient, devastating. She heard Sophia's voice in her memory. The question is not just, what do you want? It's, who will you be once you get it? Elias, Lila said again, more firmly, this is not what we agreed. His gaze shifted to her, flickering on the screen. In that moment she saw it, the crack in his restraint, the place where old wounds still bled beneath the surface of his composure. I have waited 8 years to see him held accountable, Elias said, his voice low. 8 years of watching him expand using my ideas, my structure, your labor. These emails could end him. They could end us, Clara snapped. We are building a case on the strength of verifiable, admissible evidence. This, she tapped the papers, is a grenade. You throw it, you don't get to control where the shrapnel lands. Lila swallowed, feeling her heartbeat in her throat. I won't do it, she said quietly. Even if we could get away with it, I won't become someone who tears down walls by sneaking through windows. Duarte rolled his eyes very slightly, but Clara's expression softened just enough to reveal approval. Elias's silence this time felt different. Less calculation, more internal fight. You're asking me to watch him slip through a net again, he said. There was no anger now, only something rawer. To trust that the system he's gamed for years will suddenly care about what he's done. I'm asking you, Lila replied, not to build my future on the same shortcuts that broke yours. The room went so quiet she could hear the rain against the window. They stared at each other through the screen, connected by a wire and a history they hadn't planned to share. Lila saw the boy he once must have been, idealistic, brilliant, blindsided by betrayal, and the man he had become, tempered and sharpened by it. If you want a weapon, she said softly, find someone else. I am not fighting this war to feel powerful for a moment and dirty forever after. I'm fighting so I can look at myself in the mirror when it's over. For a heartbeat, she feared he would choose the weapon, that he would walk away, take his resources, and leave her to battle Marco with only Clara and her own dwindling resolve. Then Elias exhaled slowly, long enough for his shoulders to drop. Duarte, he said, his voice regaining its usual control, you will not use these emails. Not in court, not in the press, not anonymously on some blog. Destroy your copies, all of them. Duarte opened his mouth, closed it. As you wish, he muttered, gathering the papers with clear reluctance. After the meeting, when Clara left to answer a call and Duarte disappeared down the corridor, Lila lingered in the empty conference room, staring at the darkened screen. Her phone buzzed a few minutes later. A message from Elias. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hesitated. She stared at the text, feeling the residual tremor in her hands. Then after a long moment, she typed back, I'm not angry that you hesitated. I'm only relieved you didn't stay there. There was a pause, then his reply, you pulled me back from a place I've lived in for too long. Thank you. She slipped the phone into her pocket and stepped out into the corridor, the air cool against her heated skin. Elias' heart, she realized, was not the unshakable, flawless benefactor he sometimes appeared to be. He was a man standing on the same narrow bridge she was, balancing between justice and revenge, between who he had become and who he still might be. Seeing his cracks didn't make her trust him less. It made the possibility of them standing on the same side, in the end, feel more real. Two people, both wounded by the same man, both determined not to let the wound define them. Both learning, in painful increments, how to fight without losing themselves in the battle. Winter came quietly, not with snow, but with a sharper light and a wind that slipped easily through the narrow streets of Lisbon, finding every gap in scarves and coats. The city grew paler at the edges, as if holding its breath. Inside the Palacio de Justicia, the air was stale with paper and history. Polished floors reflected fluorescent lights. Benches creaked under the weight of strangers forced to sit still with their own stories. Lila sat beside Clara Moreau at the council's table, hands folded in her lap. She wore a dark dress and a simple necklace Eva had lent her. A small silver circle resting against her collarbone, unremarkable, except that it anchored her, a tiny moon she could touch when her chest felt too tight. Marco sat a few meters away with his own counsel. He looked thinner, somehow, less dazzling. The expensive suit was still there, the careful hair, but a certain ease had drained from him, leaving behind something smaller and more brittle. He didn't look at her. She wasn't sure if that hurt or finally set her free. The civil case had taken months to assemble, but the evidence, once laid out, was like a constellation. Each point of light connected to another, forming a shape no one in the room could deny. Bank records, shell companies, false invoices, testimony from staff who had seen money moved, signatures used, promises twisted. It was not just about a broken marriage anymore. It was about fraud. About a man who had taken not only from a wife, but from employees, investors, tax authorities, a web of theft woven with charm and legal loopholes. At some point, the judge had looked over his glasses at the state prosecutor sitting in the second row and said, with pointed calm, if your office is not already aware of this pattern, it should be. They had been aware, and now they were involved. A separate criminal investigation opened. Lila found herself giving statements twice, once as a wronged spouse, once as a victim of financial crime. The titles felt strange on her tongue. She didn't feel like a victim. Not anymore. She felt like a witness. On the morning of the sentencing hearing, the weight of everything converged. The divorce settlement negotiations, the criminal charges, the headlines that had reduced years of her life into a handful of sharp words. Clara leaned closer. "They've reached a deal," she murmured. "The prosecutor and his counsel. It's what we expected." "Tell me," Lila said, voice barely a breath. "Marco will plead guilty to multiple counts of financial misconduct and tax fraud," Clara said. "In exchange for cooperation and restitution, they'll recommend reduced jail time, likely partially suspended, and a long-term ban from managing or directing companies. Heavy fines, complete disclosure of assets. It's still severe." "Not as severe as it could be," Lila replied. "No," Clara admitted. "The prosecutor wants certainty more than spectacle. A trial could drag on for years. This way, there is accountability." Across the aisle, Marco was speaking in low, urgent tones to his lawyer. His profile was familiar and foreign at once. A face she had once traced with her fingertips in the dark, now cast in a light that showed every line she had refused to see. "They'll ask if you want to make a victim impact statement," Clara added. "You're not obligated, but the judge will listen." Lila's fingers found the silver circle at her throat. She watched the judge re-enter, the murmurs quiet, the ritual unfold. Titles, charges, formal words that tried to contain what betrayal felt like from the inside. When they asked if she wished to speak, she rose on legs that felt made of air and bone in equal measure. She did not look at Marco. She looked at the judge, at the wood, at the space between them all. "My name is Lila Navarro," she began. Her voice, though soft, carried in the stillness. "For years, I believed I was building a life with this man. I left my career, my income, my autonomy because I thought what we were building together was more important than what I was building alone." She paused, steadying herself. "I did not know," she continued, "that while I was pouring everything I had into that shared life, he was quietly moving the ground from beneath my feet. That he was using my trust as collateral, my name as cover, my silence as a resource." She inhaled. The memory of sobbing on the kitchen floor flashed through her mind, but it didn't derail her. It steadied her. "He stole money, yes," she said, "but what he took from me was more than numbers in an account. He took years. He took the belief that I was safe in the home I'd built. He took my sense of competence, my confidence in my own judgment. He made me doubt not only him, but myself." For a moment, the words threatened to break her. She let them tremble, then continued. "And yet," she said, "standing here now, I know something else. He did not destroy me. He delayed me. He wounded me. But I am rebuilding. I am working again. I am learning to trust again, carefully, honestly. Those things are mine, and he has no power over them." The judge watched her, impassive but attentive. "I don't stand here asking for the harshest sentence," Lila finished. "Not because he deserves mercy he never offered me, but because I refuse to define my healing by how much he suffers. I ask the court to hold him accountable in a way that protects others from what he has done. To me, to his employees, to his investors. I ask you to send a message that charm doesn't excuse cruelty and success doesn't erase theft. After that, whatever happens to him is his journey, not mine." Her voice softened, almost to a whisper. "My life is no longer about him." The silence that followed was different from the usual courtroom quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are thinking of their own lives, their own choices, their own regrets. She sat down. Clara's hand found her forearm, a brief, grounding touch. The judge spoke, his words measured and precise. He acknowledged the severity of Marco's crimes, the pattern of abuse, the public trust betrayed. He also acknowledged his late cooperation, the plea, the willingness, however reluctant, to make restitution. In the end, the sentence fell somewhere between vengeance and leniency. A substantial prison term, partially suspended, years of professional ban, heavy fines, mandatory restitution, ongoing financial monitoring. It was not everything he could have faced. It was not nothing. When the gavel fell, the sound echoed like the closing of a door that had been left open too long. On the steps outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Microphones hovered. Her name was called from every direction. Lila felt the familiar vertigo of exposure, the urge to explain, to apologize, to defend. But she walked past them, head high, Eva on one side, Clara on the other. She said nothing. Her story had already been spoken in the place that mattered. Later, in the quiet of her small apartment, she sat on the balcony with a mug of tea warming her hands. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the city shifting toward evening. Her phone buzzed. A message from Elias. I read the statement in the court record. You were braver than I know how to be. She smiled faintly, eyes stinging, not from pain this time, but from the strange tenderness of being truly seen. I didn't ask for less punishment because I'm soft, she wrote back. I asked for enough. Enough to protect others. Enough to draw a line. The rest isn't mine to carry. His response came after a pause. That's what I meant. You chose enough, not annihilation. I've spent years wanting annihilation. Maybe it's time I learn what enough feels like. She set the phone aside and looked out over the rooftops. Marco would go on to serve his sentence, pay his fines, live with the stain he had earned. The man who once walked through kitchens as if he owned the world would now move under the gaze of institutions he had tried to manipulate. But that was not her story anymore. Her story was here, in the small space that was entirely her own, in the camera resting by the door, waiting for tomorrow, in the growing certainty that mercy, not the mercy that excuses, but the mercy that refuses to be defined by someone else's destruction, was a strength, not a weakness. She had not chosen the battlefield, but she had chosen the way she would leave it, not as a woman crushed under the weight of another man's downfall, but as someone who had looked that downfall in the eye, spoken her truth, and then turned, deliberately, toward the life awaiting her beyond the ruins. The week after the sentencing, Lisbon exhaled her from its hurried streets and sent her northward, toward the soft gray coastline of Vila Nova de Gaia, where her parents still lived in the same modest house with peeling blue shutters and a garden that smelled of rosemary and earth. Lila hadn't been home in months, not just in distance, but in spirit. There had been too much noise, too much unraveling, too much to survive. Now, carrying the quiet aftermath of a battle she hadn't chosen but had finished, she stepped onto the familiar cobblestones of her childhood street. Her mother opened the door before Lila even knocked. "Filia," she whispered, pulling her into an embrace that dissolved all the tension she had been holding in her shoulders, her breath, her bones. It was the kind of hug that didn't ask questions first. It simply held the pieces of you and trusted they would settle where they should. Inside, the house was exactly as she remembered. A ceramic rooster perched on the kitchen counter. A calendar from the neighborhood bakery hung slightly crooked near the fridge. The smell of caldo verde simmering on the stove wove through the air like a memory returning to its rightful place. Her father emerged from the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him. Hair thinner, eyes etched with new lines. But his smile was the same steady warmth she had leaned on her whole life. He took her hands in his. "My girl," he said softly, "you're home." For the first time in months, Lila allowed herself to be small. Not helpless, never again helpless, but simply a daughter who had weathered too much in too little time. The three of them ate together at the square wooden table her father had built when she was a teenager. They talked about everything except Marco, the trial, the money, the scandal. They talked about her aunt's new cat, the neighbor's outrageous decision to plant palm trees in her front yard, the upcoming festival of St. John. Normal things, soft things, things that reminded her she existed in a world far bigger than her pain. Later, as her mother washed dishes and her father sliced oranges for dessert, he cleared his throat. "I need to say something," he murmured, eyes not leaving the cutting board. Lila looked up, heart tightening. "I never liked that man," he said quietly. "I thought he was too polished, too eager to charm. But you were happy, or you looked happy, and I didn't want to be the father who seemed unable to let go." He finally met her eyes. "I should have said something. Not because I knew what he'd do, God forbid, but because you deserve to hear that someone saw you. You, not the way he framed you beside him." She reached for his hand. "Dad, you couldn't have known." "Perhaps not," he said, "but I know this. You were meant for more than helping someone else shine." His words slipped beneath her skin like balm and ache all at once. That night, Lila slept in her childhood room, the one with the pale yellow walls and the window that faced her mother's rose bushes. The sheets smelled of lavender detergent. Crickets hummed outside. No city noise, no headlines. She woke only once, when a dream of hands taking papers from her grasp surged through her mind. But the quiet of the house soothed her back into sleep. By morning, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Rested. Her mother walked her to the backyard, where winter's sunlight lay in scattered patches across soil the color of dark chocolate. "Your father told me you've been filming again," she said gently. "Show me." Lila hesitated, then returned inside to fetch her camera and laptop. They sat together on the garden bench while she pulled up the small collection of clips. Wind blowing through laundry lines, the old woman humming to her geraniums, the tram rattling through Alfama, the shadows cast by her own balcony railing. The footage felt inadequate to her. Too small, too ordinary, too much like learning to breathe underwater. But her mother watched with quiet reverence, as if each image held a story worth hearing. When the video ended, her mother touched her cheek. "This is you," she said. "You see the world in ways I never could. Ordinary things become meaning in your hands." The praise cracked something warm, open in her chest. But returning to filmmaking outside the safety of her mother's garden was not romantic. It was messy, frustrating, humbling in ways she had not anticipated. Back in Lisbon, Lila enrolled in a weekend documentary workshop recommended by Professor Anna Reese, her former mentor. Walking into the classroom felt like stepping through a door she had once closed on herself. She sat among younger filmmakers, some barely old enough to drink legally, who carried expensive gear and confidence like second skin. During introductions, one woman said she had filmed protests in Chile. Another mentioned a short that had already won a festival award. When Lila said she was returning to the craft after some years in another field, a few heads turned toward her, with curiosity she wasn't sure she welcomed. The first assignment was deceptively simple. Capture a person's truth in a 2-minute portrait. Lila chose Anna's suggestion, a woman named Gloria, who worked at a local shelter for survivors of domestic and financial abuse. Gloria was warm, open, willing to be filmed. They sat in a room with soft lighting and dusty bookshelves, and Lila asked questions she cared about deeply. But when she reviewed the footage at home, her stomach dropped. It was fine, competent, but safe. Too safe. Her framing was cautious, her questions polite. She had filmed Gloria with care, but not with courage. She had captured words, but not essence. Sophia's voice echoed in her mind. "What have you not allowed yourself to say?" In class, when she showed the portrait, the critique was gentle, but pointed. "A lovely start," said one student. "Technically solid," another added. "But we want to see you in the work," Anna said, kindness wrapped around truth. "You're still afraid to take up space in your own art." "Why?" Lila swallowed. "I didn't want to intrude." "There is no storytelling without intrusion," Anna replied softly. "Compassionate intrusion, yes, but you must be willing to stand in the room as yourself, not as an observer hiding behind the lens." The words stung, but they also pierced through something calcified inside her. She packed up her camera after class, cheeks flushed, heart heavy, but somewhere in her chest, a new beat had begun. Clumsy, earnest, real. She walked home slowly, through streets lit with warm lamps, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting in the air. The city no longer felt like a stage where she had performed another person's life. It felt like a place that could hold her mistakes, her experiments, her uncertain steps toward a future she was still learning how to imagine. That night, back in her apartment, she set her camera on the table and whispered to it as if it were an old friend returning after years apart. Let's try again. The invitation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, tucked between legal correspondence and workshop assignments. So ordinary, in fact, that Lila almost overlooked it. It was a simple email from Elias Hart. The subject line unassuming, project proposal, need your eye. She clicked it open, expecting some technical update, perhaps a question about a press release or documentation for the foundation he directed. Instead, she found a detailed outline for an ambitious new initiative, a community housing and resource center for survivors of financial and domestic abuse. Built on land Elias had quietly acquired months earlier, a place with private apartment units, shared courtyards, vocational training rooms, counseling spaces, gardens for healing. A place designed not as a hiding spot, but as a starting point, a home for those learning to reclaim the parts of themselves taken or silenced. At the end of the message, one line waited for her. I would like you to lead the storytelling, design the resident experience, and shape the project's emotional core. You understand this from the inside, and I trust your vision. Lila read the sentence 3 times. Trust your vision. When had she last heard those words spoken without condescension, without someone adding a condition or correction? She replied before doubt could creep in. When can we meet? They met at the construction site the next afternoon, on the outskirts of Lisbon, 10 windswept acres that did not yet look like hope. The ground was uneven, scattered with stakes and bright flags marking preliminary surveys. Scrub grass rustled in the wind, and beyond the hill, the river shimmered like a promise waiting to be shaped. Elias stood near a cluster of rolled blueprints, coat unbuttoned, hair tugged gently by the breeze. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and something softened in his expression. A quietness she had begun to recognize as the closest thing he allowed himself to tenderness. Thank you for coming, he said. You made it sound important. It is. He handed her a set of papers, and as she flipped through them, her breath caught. Architectural sketches, interior layouts, landscape designs. She ran her fingers lightly over one drawing, a central courtyard with a circular bench around an olive tree. The trunk was broad, ancient, drawn with deliberate reverence. You chose an olive? She murmured. They symbolize renewal, Elias said, and light after destruction. Her throat tightened. He guided her along the dirt path that would one day be a walkway paved with tiles. Tiles crafted by local artisans, each carrying a story. He described how the rooms would be arranged for safety, how natural light would be prioritized, how every window would face a space of growth, gardens, trees, the river. Then he stopped and looked at her. But the architecture is only foundation. The soul of this place, that must come from someone who's lived the questions it attempts to answer. Lila wrapped her arms around herself, partly against the wind, partly against the intimacy of his gaze. What exactly are you asking me to do? Build the emotional architecture, he said simply. The programs, the atmosphere, the narrative that will guide the women who live here, and the documentary that will tell the world why places like this matter. A slow warmth spread through her chest. Fear tried to rise too, but hope rose faster. This is big, Elias, she whispered. It's bigger than anything I've ever done. He smiled faintly. Good, because you're bigger than you've allowed yourself to be. The following weeks unfolded like a tapestry woven of purpose and chaos. Lila worked at her tiny kitchen table, papers and sketches spreading like wings around her. She mapped out healing programs with social workers, designed shared spaces that felt intimate without being stifling, and interviewed survivors. Women who cried, who laughed, who confessed that safety wasn't just locks on doors, but a sense of being believed. She filmed everything, hands kneading dough in a communal kitchen, a woman tracing the outline of her future room on a blueprint with trembling fingers, social workers watching as children played in the dusty field where a playground would soon stand. Her camera returned to life with an urgency she hadn't felt in years. Elias visited the site frequently, sometimes accompanied by engineers or architects, sometimes alone. Their conversations were long, tangled, necessary. One afternoon, they stood beneath the bare skeleton of the future community center, a lattice of beams against the winter sky. She held her camera in her hands, reviewing footage. "You're filming differently now," Elias said quietly. "How so?" "You're in the footage," he replied. "Even when you're behind the lens, you're present. You're not hiding." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't realize." "I did," he said, "and so will anyone who watches your film." There was no flirtation in his tone, just truth. And somehow that moved her more than any romance could. But building something sacred often reveals fault lines, not just in the project, but in the people creating it. One evening, after a brutal design review where the city inspector questioned nearly every aspect of their plan, Lila found Elias alone in the makeshift site office, hands braced against the table, his posture rigid. "You're angry," she said softly. He didn't deny it. "I am furious," he said, "at the bureaucracy, at the delays, at people who talk about survivors like they're statistics, not human beings, at the way one man's greed forced us into this war in the first place." She approached cautiously. "Elias?" His jaw clenched. "And at myself, for caring more about destroying the man who stole from me than about building something that returns what he took." There it was, the crack she had glimpsed before, now widened by strain. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. His breath caught, but he didn't move away. "We've both been living in the shadow of what he did," she said. "But this," she gestured to the blueprint-draped room, the construction site beyond. "This isn't his shadow, this is our light." Slowly he straightened. His eyes, when they met hers, held something unguarded. "You're helping me remember," he murmured, "what I used to dream of building before hate entered the blueprint." And for a moment they simply stood there, two people shaped by different wounds, finding in each other not a cure, but a companion for the long, uneven walk toward healing. Something passed between them, a recognition, a deepening, a beginning, not explosive, not dramatic, but steady, like the laying of a foundation stone. There was outside, the wind pressed gently against the skeletal beams of the future center. Inside, Lila realized she was no longer building a project. She was building a new life. One frame, one decision, one moment of courage at a time. The email arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a contractor's revised quote and an update from the city council. At first, Lila almost deleted it without opening. The sender's name alone made her chest tighten. From Marco Vega. Subject: no excuse, but an apology. Her finger hovered above the trackpad, breath held in the quiet of her small office at the project site. Outside the window, construction noise rumbled faintly. Hammers, shouted instructions, the low growl of a cement mixer. The sound of something new being built. For a long moment, she simply stared at his name. Once, seeing it would have sent a rush of warmth through her veins. Now it felt like holding a seashell from a beach she no longer visited. Familiar, but no longer home. At last, she clicked. "Lila, I know I am the last person you want to hear from. I wouldn't blame you if you delete this without reading. I'm writing it as much for myself as for you. There is no excuse in what I'm about to say, only acknowledgement. I've been in mandatory therapy for months now. Part of my sentence, part of some attempt at rehabilitation. I went in angry, convinced I was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife and an envious ex-partner. That story has not survived contact with the truth. My therapist calls what I've done a pattern of control. I use people's love as leverage. I mistook dependence for devotion. I believe that if I provided a life, I owned the lives I touched. I did this to you most of all. I took your work and called it help. I took your sacrifices and called them natural. I took your trust and used it as a shield while I moved money behind your back. I made you feel smaller so that I could feel larger. You were never weak, Lila. You were generous, brave. You loved me with a depth I did not deserve and could not return. In return, I cut away pieces of you and told you it was for our future. I am not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. I know that saying, "I'm sorry," does not rebuild the years I burned, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see the woman who moved to Lisbon for love and ended up having to rebuild her life from ruins I created. I see the filmmaker who put down her camera to hold up my world and who has, somehow, picked it up again. I read about your housing project, about the center, about what you're building for women like you, like us perhaps, in ways I never wanted to admit. I don't know if it means anything, but I am proud. From very far away, with no right to be, I am proud of you. I hope you find a life that has nothing to do with me. I hope one day, when my name crosses your mind, it's only as a closed chapter, not an open wound. There is no reason for you to respond. Marco. By the time she reached the last line, Lila realized her shoulders had relaxed. Not in forgiveness, not in that sweeping, erasing way stories sometimes pretend is simple, but in something quieter. Acceptance, perhaps, or distance. She read it again, this time listening not as the woman he had once loved, but as the woman she had become. The words were not manipulative. They did not ask to be absolved. They were what he had said they were. Acknowledgement. She closed the laptop gently. There was no need to answer. This, too, would not be hers to carry. Instead, she picked up her phone and called the person whose voice had become part of her new landscape. "Elias?" she said when he answered. "I'm here," he replied. "Everything all right?" "Marco wrote to me." A brief pause. "What did he want?" "Nothing, really," she said. "He apologized, properly, without excuses, without asking for a response." "And how do you feel?" he asked. She considered the question. "Oddly indifferent," she said at last. "Not cold, just finished. He's no longer the axis my life spins around. He's a man I once loved who made choices I won't live under anymore." "That's a profound kind of freedom," Elias murmured. She could almost hear the small smile behind his words. "I'm glad." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you still think about him the way you once did?" There was a longer pause this time. She imagined him in his office, the wide windows framing river and sky, fingers curled around a mug gone lukewarm. "Less," he admitted. "The hatred doesn't flare as often, and when it does, it feels misplaced, like shouting at a shadow. He's already paying for what he did, to you, to me, to others. The part of me that wanted to stand over his ruins and feel triumphant, it's quieter now." "What changed?" she asked. "You," he said simply. Then, after a beat, "And this project, watching you turn your pain into shelter for others, has forced me to confront something I tried to ignore." "Which is?" "That it's possible to build a future that isn't just the inverse of the past," he replied. "For years, my vision of moving on was just his destruction. No him, no success, no empire. I neglected to ask what presence I wanted in my life, only what absence." His honesty settled over her like a soft shawl. "And now?" she asked. "Now," Elias said, "I'm starting to care more about the women who will live in these apartments than about whether he reads about them from a prison library. Now, when I come to the site, I don't think he should have done this. I think, I'm grateful we are doing this." "We." The word warmed her in places she hadn't known were still cold. A few days later, at Sophia's suggestion, Lila booked a short mediation session with Marco, not to reconcile but to finalize some lingering, practical details. The disposition of a joint piece of land, a lingering business contract in both their names. The facilitator's office was neutral, pale walls and neutral chairs, and water glasses too elegant for their awkward purpose. Marco entered with a guarded expression, his movements smaller than she remembered. Prison had not happened yet, but the looming sentence had already narrowed his world. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, once they were seated. I wasn't sure you would. I'm here for the documents, Lila replied, her tone gentle but firm. Not for us. He nodded. I know. They went through the necessary formalities with the mediator. Voices calm, signatures neat, choices sensible. It was astonishing, Lila thought, how ordinary the end of something monumental could look on paper. As they parted, Marco hesitated, then said, I meant what I wrote, about your project, about being proud of you. Pride is no longer something I seek from you, she said not unkindly. But I hope for your own sake, you learn to be proud of the man you are trying to become, not the one you were. Something like pain or humility flickered over his features. He nodded once. Goodbye, Lila. Goodbye, Marco. She stepped out into the sunlight and felt the last tether loosen, not with drama, but with a quiet click, like a door closing gently behind her, leaving her facing only forward. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the skeleton of the future housing complex cast long shadows on the ground, Lila found Elias standing alone by the emerging courtyard. The first outlines of the circular bench around the olive tree had been poured. He looked up as she approached. How did it go? Clean, she said. Necessary. Final. And you? I thought I might feel rage, she admitted, or triumph. Instead, I just felt done, like finishing the last page of a book and putting it back on the shelf, knowing you won't read it again, but you're grateful that you made it through. Elias smiled, something soft and proud in his eyes. You've traveled a long way from the woman I first called, he said. So have you, she replied. You're different. He huffed a quiet laugh. Therapy will do that, and being told no when I suggest breaking a few more rules. Her gaze held his. I'm glad you listened. I am too, he said, because if I hadn't, I might have destroyed more than his reputation. I might have destroyed the parts of myself I still want to believe can be good. They stood in silence a moment, watching workers pack up for the day. The wind rustled where leaves would one day be, where voices would one day rise, where children would one day run. Do you still hate him? Lila asked softly. He shook his head slowly. No, he answered. I remember what he did. I respect the damage. But hate requires energy I would rather spend on this. He gestured to the foundations around them. And on, his voice trailed off. On? She prompted, though her heart already knew. His eyes found hers again, steady and unflinching. On the people who are here now, he said. On you. The words didn't strike like lightning. They arrived like dawn, gradual, inevitable, touching everything with a clearer light. Neither of them moved to close the distance just yet. The story of them was no longer about urgency, but about intention. They had both lived too long in reactions, to Marco's choices, to pain, to fear. What they were learning now was action chosen carefully, step by step. Behind them, bathed in evening gold, the future rose slowly from the ground. Marco's chapter had been written, read, and closed. Not erased, not forgotten, but finally shelved where it belonged, in the past. What remained was this: two people, both cracked and mending, choosing to grow toward the light, not in spite of what had been broken, but with a tenderness made possible only because they had once been shattered. Spring crept into Lisbon the way new love had crept into Lila's life. Quietly at first, then all at once, until one morning she woke and realized the whole city had changed color. The housing project was nearly finished. Fresh plaster gleamed pale and hopeful under the sun. Windows had been installed, capturing pieces of sky. In the central courtyard, the young olive tree had taken root, its slender branches already reaching outward, as if impatient for the stories it would one day overhear. Lila stood beneath that tree on a soft April afternoon, smoothing her hands down the front of a simple cream dress. It wasn't the gown she'd imagined in her 20s, no heavy skirt, no extravagant train, no glittering veil. It was soft and unadorned, the kind of dress you could move in, breathe in, live in. Eva adjusted the delicate hairpin at the back of her head, fingers limber, eyes suspiciously bright. "You're sure you're okay?" her sister murmured. "We can still turn this into a party, you know. Rent a venue, hire a band, invite half the city." Lila laughed, nerves and gratitude braided together. "I don't want half the city," she said. "I want this." This was not the sort of wedding that made magazine covers. A small gathering of people who mattered and no one who didn't. Her parents standing near the entrance of the courtyard, her mother in a deep blue dress, her father in his best suit, shoulders squared with pride. Eva and her husband, their children fidgeting with ribbons tied to chairs. Professor Anna Reese, her eyes shining with the quiet delight of someone watching a favorite student reclaim themselves. Gloria from the shelter, and two of the women who would soon move into the apartments here, their presence a blessing more potent than any official title. No elaborate floral arches, just wildflowers gathered from local fields, tucked into simple glass jars along the edge of the circular bench. No officiant in ornate robes, just a dear friend of Elias's, a lawyer-turned-judge with kind eyes, willing to stand in that thin line between legal and sacred. Elias stood a few steps away, talking quietly with her father. He wore a dark suit and a tie the color of the river at dusk. When he turned and saw her, the conversation fell away. His breath caught. He had seen her at her lowest. Eyes red with grief, shoulders burdened with court dates and invoices and late-night questions. He had seen her wrapped in blankets on her tiny balcony, camera beside her like an anchor. He had seen her in jeans and old t-shirts at the building site, hair tied up, hands smudged with dust and ink and purpose. But this was different. Today she wasn't hiding or bracing or fighting. She was simply standing there, fully herself. Their eyes met, and the courtyard, the half-finished building, the city beyond, all of it faded into a soft blur. The judge cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" They gathered in a loose circle beneath the olive tree. The air smelled of fresh cement and jasmine, and the faint salt tang carried from the river. Patches of sunlight danced over the tiles like blessings too restless to stay in one place. "We are here," the judge began, "in a space that didn't exist a year ago, to witness something that also didn't exist then. This partnership, chosen with eyes open." He smiled at them both. "Lila and Elias have asked that this be simple. No grand speeches from me, just vows from them." He nodded to Lila. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the small piece of paper she tucked into her palm. Not from doubt, never from doubt again, but from the gravity of saying out loud what her heart had learned the hardest way. She looked at Elias, and the rest of the world disappeared. "I stood in a courthouse," she began softly, "and watched another version of forever break apart. I know now that promises spoken without self-knowledge are fragile things. Today I won't promise perfection. I won't promise that I'll never be afraid, or never doubt, or never falter." Her voice grew steadier. "But I will promise this. I will not disappear inside your life. I won't lay my dreams at your feet and call it love. I will bring them to the table and ask you to sit beside them." She took a breath. "I promise to keep my work, my voice, my faith, my friendships, not hidden in the pockets of our marriage, but alive at its center. I promise to tell you when I'm overwhelmed instead of quietly drowning. I promise to let you see me when I am messy, uncertain, and in need, not just when I am composed and capable." Her eyes glistened. "And I promise to see you not as a savior or a repayment for what I've lost, but as a man choosing every day to be kinder than his history, braver than his fears, and more honest than the stories that once defined him. I don't need you to complete me, Elias. I am already whole. But I want to walk with you as two whole people into whatever comes next." She folded the paper, though the last words were memorized in her bones. "I choose you, not instead of myself, but alongside myself. That is my vow." By the time she finished, Elias's eyes shone openly. No attempt to blink it away, no performance, just truth, standing there in a man who had once built walls so carefully around his heart. He unfolded his own paper, exhaled, and smiled wryly. I rewrote this 3 times, he confessed, earning a soft ripple of laughter. The early drafts were elaborate. Old habits die hard. He sobered. Lila, when I first called you, I told myself it was about justice, about finally winning a war I'd lost years before. But somewhere between legal meetings and late-night calls, between construction plans and your shaky first documentary pitch, something happened. The story stopped being about him and started being about you, about us. He glanced down briefly, then back up. I spent 8 years believing trust was too expensive, that safety meant control, that if I let someone close, they would either leave or take what I couldn't afford to lose. I can't promise those fears are gone, but I can promise I won't let them drive our life. His voice softened. I promise never to use your pain as a weapon, not even against the people who caused it. I promise never to make you choose between loving me and loving your work. I promise that when you doubt yourself, and you will, I will remind you of who you are, not who I need you to be. He stepped a fraction closer. I promise to tell you when my old instincts surface, when I want to control or retreat or sabotage something beautiful before it can leave me. I will not make my fears your responsibility to fix, but I will let you see them so that I am not hiding in the shadows of my own house. He smiled, a small, unsteady curve. I don't want a wife who disappears into my story. I want a partner whose story is so vivid, mine doesn't dim it, only stands beside it. I choose you, Lila, not as redemption for my past, but as my companion in whatever good we can create from here. He folded his paper with hands that shook, just enough to reveal that these words cost him something, that they were not easy. That made them sacred. The judge cleared his throat again, eyes suspiciously bright. Rings? He prompted gently. Ava stepped forward, placing 2 simple gold bands in his palm. No diamonds, no ornate carvings, just circles, unbroken, unadorned, strong. Lila slipped the ring onto Elias's finger, feeling the warmth of his hand, the steady pulse under his skin. From this day, she whispered, you are not my owner, my savior, or my debt. You are my chosen. He slid the band onto her hand, thumb brushing her knuckles in a touch that felt like a question and an answer all at once. From this day, he murmured, I will not hold you with fear, but with open hands. The judge smiled. Then by the laws of this country and in the presence of these witnesses, I pronounce you husband and wife. There was a soft ripple of applause, the rustle of dresses, the sniffle of someone trying not to cry too loudly. The world seemed to lean in, just a little, to watch what they would do next. Lila and Elias looked at one another, neither rushing. They had rushed into nothing. Every step had been deliberate, carved out of hard-earned self-knowledge. May I? He asked quietly. You may, she said. The kiss was not cinematic. There was no dip, no dramatic clutching, no cheering crowd. It was soft and careful and precisely right. A promise sealed not with fireworks, but with warmth. When they parted, her tears were not of fear or grief, but of something far more fragile. The realization that she had found a way to love again without losing herself. Around them, the unfinished building stood quietly, like a witness. Soon, women would move into the apartments above, carrying their own histories of loss and resilience. Children would play in the courtyard. Stories would unfold in the rooms Lila had helped design. Their wedding wasn't an ending. It was an agreement to build a life where love did not demand erasure, where partnership meant space for 2 whole souls, and where both of them could continue to grow, not toward each other as a desperate convergence, but side by side toward the light. The morning of the inauguration arrived dressed in gold. Lisbon unfurled beneath a warm spring sun, rooftops glowing, the river shimmering as if lit from within. The breeze carried notes of jacaranda and distant laughter. It felt, Lila thought, like a day that had been waiting for them. She stood before the completed housing complex, a place that existed once only as sketches and longing. Now it rose clean and strong from the earth. Terracotta accents, pale stone walls, wide windows that captured the day's promise. In the center courtyard, the young olive tree swayed gently, its leaves whispering secrets of survival and quiet victory. Already families were gathering. Children tugged on their mothers' sleeves, eager to explore the playground. Women stepped through the entrance with wide, cautious eyes. Eyes used to measuring threat first, safety second. Today, for the first time in too long, they stepped into a space designed to hold them rather than hurt them. Elias touched Lila's arm, grounding her. He looked different these days, not in appearance but in presence. Lighter somehow. The years of bitterness that had once edged his voice had softened into something wiser, steadier. Standing beside her now, he radiated a quiet pride that made her chest hum with warmth. "You ready?" he asked. Lila smiled. "I am." Journalists and local officials gathered near the courtyard entrance. But there were no red carpets, no grand stage. That wasn't the point. The heart of the day lived in the women who now stood in folding chairs, arranged in a semicircle around the olive tree. Each face carried its own story: betrayal, rebuilding, fear, courage. Lila stepped forward. Conversations faded. Children quieted. The breeze itself seemed to lean in. "Thank you all for being here," she began. Her voice was soft, yet the courtyard carried it easily. "There were times in my life when I believed survival meant staying small, staying silent, staying grateful for the smallest scraps of kindness. I believed that faith meant holding on to something broken until God decided to fix it." A murmur rippled briefly, recognition, empathy, shared ache. "But faith," she continued, "is not endurance alone. Faith is knowing when to let go, when to walk away, when to rebuild rather than repair, when to turn the page instead of rereading the same sentence until the ink fades." Her gaze swept the courtyard. Families, advocates, her parents, Eva holding back tears, Professor Anna, Gloria from the shelter, women who had lived through their own storms, women she had once been. "This place," Lila said, "is not only new walls and safe rooms. It is proof that stories don't end where they break. They begin again where courage takes root." She glanced at Elias. He nodded. "This project was built by people who believe in second beginnings," she said, "and by someone who taught me that love is not a rescue. It's a choice, a partnership, a place to grow without fear of disappearing." A hush fell, soft, reverent. Elias stepped beside her then, speaking only a few words. "This center exists because truth survived long enough to build something better. May every person who lives here feel the full measure of their worth." Together, they lifted a simple ribbon stretched across the entrance. No dramatic countdown, no pomp, just two pairs of steady hands, cutting through silk the way they had learned to cut through past shadows. Applause rose, gentle at first, then swelling, wrapping around them like gratitude made sound. Children ran through the entrance, laughing. A woman in her 60s touched the doorway frame with trembling fingers, as if to test whether it was real. Lila felt her heart expand so wide, she wondered how it had ever lived inside her ribcage. Later, after tours and embraces, after speeches and shared bread, and a chorus of new voices echoing through new halls, Lila slipped away to the courtyard. She stood before the olive tree, one hand resting on its young trunk. Her mother joined her quietly. "You prayed for years," her mother said. "Do you think any of this was an answer?" Lila thought about it for a long moment. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling her hands with light. "I don't think faith is about answers anymore," she said softly. "I think it's about direction. God doesn't always rebuild what breaks. Sometimes he lets it fall so we can walk a different road. One that leads here, to this." Her mother smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I like this version of you, Philha. She stands taller." Lila looked toward the walkway, where Elias was helping a young boy test out the new fountain. both of them laughing when the water sprayed higher than expected. She felt her future shift in that direction, steady, bright, built from choices instead of fear. "I like this version of me too," she whispered. Later, when the sun dipped low and the first lights flickered on beneath the new roofs, Lila and Elias sat on a stone bench beneath the olive tree. The courtyard hummed around them, voices settling into a new home, children negotiating bedtime, a woman humming an old lullaby through an open window. "This is the beginning," Elias murmured. "For them," Lila said, "and for us." "For us," he echoed. They sat quietly, watching the glow spill from apartment windows like lanterns filled with hope. Lila felt a deep, steady peace rise within her, the kind that came not from perfection, but from presence, not from erasing the past, but from rewriting the ending. Her hand found Elias's on the bench, fingers weaving with his. He leaned his head lightly against hers, an unspoken vow renewed with each shared breath. The olive tree rustled. Children laughed. Somewhere, a door opened. Somewhere else, another one closed gently. Life moved, and she moved with it, finally aligned with the woman she had fought to become. If Lila's journey touched something in you, if her courage, her rebuilding, her return to herself resonated, then stay close. Like, comment, and follow the channel, so more stories like this can find the people who need them. Because endings aren't always endings. Sometimes they're the first step into a life you were meant to claim.